Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Search Engine Journal webinar. Today, we're going to be joined by Anil and Erik from Milestone, who are going to be talking about SEO after COVID-19, or also known as coronavirus. I really think you're going to enjoy this presentation. I got a chance, as always, to kind of go through it ahead of time. A lot of really great examples, really practical information and knowledge that's really helpful when it comes to thinking about what to do during and even after this whole pandemic thing. So my name's Brent Torres, in case you're wondering who's rambling right now, and I'll be moderating today. Anil and Erik, can you both just take a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into some housekeeping points?
Hi, I'm Anil Aggarwal, and I'm CEO of Milestone. Been involved in the search space now for over 15 years. And I look forward to the conversation today. Go ahead.
I'm Erik Newton. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Milestone, and I joined about 5 weeks ago. And I've been in the search space for a little over 20 years.
Awesome. So quick housekeeping points I'll kind of run through. If during the webinar at any point you have any questions, comments, things you'd like to share, please use the webinar question box. It's in the bottom of your screen in that little go-to webinar control panel. All of your questions, put them through there. We will take those questions, we'll take those comments, we'll combine them, hold on to them to the end when we have Q&A. And that's where we will ask those questions to get those answers. There will be a poll, actually 2 polls in the middle of the presentation. So if you have a moment and you see those polls come up, I'll launch them. Please take a moment to fill them out. It helps, the speakers kind of understand where the level is and how far along people are in their marketing process. So just take a few moments and participate. That also helps us know everybody's still awake. At the end of everything, we will have a Q&A. And like I had mentioned earlier, please, even during the Q&A, just keep throwing your questions in there. Anil and Erik are extremely knowledgeable, and they're going to be happy to answer all of your questions. So by all means, please participate in that. It's sometimes some of the best value you get can come from the Q&A. We will do our best throughout the webinar to link any resources or tools in the chat. And in social media and wherever else we think to. But if you have any questions or if we miss something, please just throw it in there saying, what was that tool? What was that resource? And we'll make sure that you get it. After the webinar, stick around. We have a 5-minute or less short survey that really helps us kind of gauge how the presentation went, what we can do better, where we can improve. It doesn't take long, so if you can just take a moment to kind of fill it out, it really helps us out. And lastly, the entire webinar will be recorded and made available through a recap post on Search Engine Journal. Typically around Monday, sometimes it runs a little later, but normally around Monday that recap post comes out. So without any further ado, grab a pen, take some notes, and Erik and Anil, take us away.
Great. Thanks, Brent. Milestone provides an omni-channel solution that combines a MarTech platform with expert support for hospitality, retail, financial, B2B tech, healthcare, and agency, with the fastest and only SEO-first CMS on the market. We serve brands and are now white labeling our solutions to agencies and integrators as well. So if you'd like to learn more about that, please follow up after the webinar. So we started thinking about the CRG, the Crisis Recovery and Growth concept, because in early March, when the COVID virus hit the United States and we started to have shelter-in-place orders and disruption, our customers, of which we have hundreds, were looking to us for guidance. And as we started to respond to each customer, we realized that this was something that the pattern was very clear and that a lot of customers were going to need this information. And not only were they going to need to know how to respond in the crisis phase, but they also would need to know what to do in the middle phase, the recovery phase, the new normal, which we're kind of approaching now, and how to capitalize and get back to regular business in the growth phase. So we built the CRG framework and we rolled it out last week in our community, and we are developing a webinar series for a deep channel dive across the CRG periods, working with industry thought leaders. So next week, we're going to be doing local with Greg Sterling and Andrew Shotland. The week after, we're going to be doing content in B2B with Fernando Angelou from SEMrush and some other speakers. And we're lining up some great speakers for paid at the end of the month. So you can sign up at the link below, and we hope to see you in those webinars also. So today's agenda is to show you the CRG framework and then to talk about some very specific crisis and recovery tactics. In the first two phases, what SEO tactics are going to be the most relevant, and we have a lot of case studies from around the industry and from around our customer base to analyze and share with you. We're going to go into the pitfalls and the don'ts and the takeaways and the do's, and have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. So this is the crisis recovery and growth framework. And what you'll see is a kind of a typical integrated omni-channel approach to thinking about how we do marketing. But what's different is that we have prioritized different channels at different phases during the CRG process. And in the beginning, in the crisis phase, the website and local and digital is absolutely the best way to get information out to your customers. And you're going to have to be adding content on somewhat of an emergency basis. I think we've all went through that over the last couple of weeks. And now we're kind of entering the recovery phase, where we listen to our customers, we find out how to tune the business and figure out how to package what we're offering to our customers in the most effective way. In addition, in the recovery phase, because we might be a little slower than normal, a little less business travel, fewer in-person events, we think it's a great time to look at some of the interesting and somewhat time-consuming projects that SEO is often on our SEO list, but doesn't make it into the top 3, like schemas and AMP and site performance and flow and user experience. These are some of the things that if we get these right, we'll be able to reap those benefits into the growth phase in a couple of months and then into next year. So this is the CRG framework. And what we're going to focus on out of those 14 topics are 5 in particular: offers, local, FAQs, voice, schemas, and AMP. And as a kind of a bonus treat for all of the hundreds of attendees here in the webinar today, we have some schema research that has never been published anywhere else before that we're going to share with you. So this data from the Harvard Business Review is encouraging, I think, because just 25 days after the lockdowns ended and kind of the peak of the flat period in China, that real estate activity is returning to about 70–75% of normal. So that's that V-shaped recovery that we've seen in previous pandemic and epidemic outbreaks in Asia, and that we're hoping to see here. So that puts us, after we get out of shelter in place, it puts us about, another month or two into approaching a more normal economy. Now, on the right are some uneven recoveries in market cap and stock performance for different sectors. And within each of these sectors, there's going to be winners and losers who are performing better and worse. And what we're hoping is that we can do as much as possible by sharing this framework with you to keep you on the high side of your industry and recovery line. So the first thing that we think you should think about after crisis, after the immediate crisis and the scrambling that I think a lot of us, that all companies had to go through in the early weeks, is to develop even better offers and packages for your customers. And the way you do that is to listen and understand and match what you do to what your customers are saying they need. And that's, always good blocking and tackling of marketing, but it's particularly important now that things are so disrupted and changing so quickly. So where can we get this information? Typical sources are, search data, query trends, Google Trends. Additional one that we often overlook is site search. So within your own site search, if you have Google Analytics, you can look up the queries that are being used on your own website and find out what people are asking you. Your CS people are on the phone and on chats with customers, and there's a lot of information there. If you can organize that and pattern match there, you'll be able to see what people are asking for and see if you need to make an adjustment in what you're offering your customers. Forums and social are even more immediate. You can see what's happening on Twitter in real time. And something that's really interesting, given the way the pandemic has been spreading across the world, is look at other countries. Throughout the last 100 years or so, other countries look to the United States for examples of what to do in business. But given that China and Korea and Singapore and Hong Kong went through this before us and went through a similar pattern, we can look at companies in our industry in another country and get some ideas of what they did and borrow some of those ideas and bring them to market quickly. So what would you be changing? Well, some of the categories here, I put 5 categories together to kind of organize these thoughts. The service. So obviously the hours have been changing. People have been going digital as much as possible with video teleconference, telemedicine, exercising by video, and obviously changing the delivery mechanism so that we have physical delivery and pickup, and looking at products. So the menus have been changing, what people are putting together as the offers and the SKUs has been changing. You can incentivize certain behavior, free trial, status, subscription. And you should think about being more flexible on payment methods. People are struggling a little bit, and on a B2B basis and on mortgages, there's going to be some forbearance that keeps people in business and makes them your customer, builds customer loyalty for them to continue being your customer in growth phase and beyond. And with all of these new packages that you put together, as we always do with marketing, you need to test the headlines, the images, the FAQs, and the CTAs. So let's take a specific look at a really good campaign that was put out by Papa John's. So Papa John's has kind of had a home-based business. A delivery business was a huge portion of their revenue. And they realized that customers, though they were used to getting pizza delivered, had some concerns about virus transmission on the food, on the box, and from the deliverer. And they very quickly developed a no-touch production and delivery method to allay the fears. And they put up a web page that describes all this. So in the immediate crisis phase on the right, they updated their local so that dine-in is eliminated, and they identified all of their delivery partners to make it easy for you to order that way. And they deployed this new page, and the new page shows up exactly where you'd want it to, position 1, position 0. But I don't see any people also ask. I don't see the questions that show up in the top of the SERPs showing up for them. And that's a bit of a missed opportunity. So when I looked into the source code here, and I see some goods, and I see a couple opportunities. The title is bang on. It is telling you the value proposition and the brand, and then it's hitting the value proposition again. It's being truncated in the layout within the SERP, so it's a little bit long, but I see what they're doing there. Now they filled out the keyword metadata, which is interesting because it's not a very important one, but it's updated to this contactless topic. Now the description is not updated. It looks like the traditional description they would use for kind of a standard page on their website. But lucky for them that Google ignored their meta description and picked up information off the page. This is something Google has been expanding over the last couple of years as it learns how to match the intent with the content. Now, I don't see any schema code on their website, which I think is an opportunity for them to develop. And I don't see any FAQs, and so that's also an opportunity, just to add a traditional FAQ section as people, it's a great, digital is the best way to answer people's questions without, using your staff time. They haven't put up a YouTube video of their ads or their TV commercial yet. I think that's something they could expand. But I love the graphic. I absolutely love what they did with this original graphic. It's very clear. It's very well labeled. It's got the right feel to it. So overall, I'd say this is like a 4.25 out of 5 stars on execution. They did it really fast in the crisis phase. So hats off to Papa John's. I hope that they develop a lot of new customers, new customer loyalty, and that it serves them, throughout the recovery and growth phase. Next, let's look at another company who's been very strong and a kind of a sustaining company in retail, with a very strong technical team that I've been in contact with over the years. And they had to have realized that shelter at home is a fantastic sales opportunity for TVs and home theater, because that's what a lot of people are going to be doing: gaming, computers, TV, home theater. But people weren't coming to the stores because they were either nervous about the stores or they were actually in shelter in place. So what they did is they did something similar to Papa John's, but they repurposed their existing curbside pickup, which had existed for a while and had a lot of infrastructure in their on their website for you to be able to buy online and pick up in store. And what you see here when you query contactless curbside pickup Best Buy is that they come up in the right position, but the title tag doesn't have the new concept in it, but the description does. So they've got this contactless curbside pickup is very current for the crisis phase. And then if you go down to the people also ask, it is very much on target with curbside pickup. So it's really consistent. And you go down one more and it's into the frequently asked questions. The infrastructure here is fantastic. Now, when I look at the code, when I look at the source code for Best Buy, I do see Schema, and I see Schema for breadcrumbs, which is the thing that helps you remember where you are and navigate backwards and forwards in the site, which is something that every website can use, and it's a good signal to the Google crawler that the information's better organized. And I see FAQs, and I see the schema.org breadcrumbs on the FAQ page. Now, what I don't see are some of the detailed, like the FAQ schema marker and the how-to and the video and so forth are not here. So this is a simple schema, and it's great that they've got the foundation, but it's not what we would call robust schema yet. Now, looking out on social, I see that they've got the campaign is being marketed on Twitter, which is fantastic. There is a YouTube video that is targeted exactly to this contact list concept. And hats off to them, they've got user-generated content where people are taking advantage of and doing a self-video going to pick up curbside. So a lot of things going right here. I'd say it's like 4.75 out of 5 stars here, with a couple of opportunities to expand the schema and make an even better statement on placing their facts into the Google Knowledge Graph. So as I mentioned, I've been in search since 1999, and over the years since 2008, we've had the named algo updates that, for the most part, were affecting cheaters and people who are trying to sort of scam and take angles on the system up through Hummingbird and maybe Pigeon. And then after that, Google was just making the environment better, starting in about 2015 with mobile first and local results, and continuing to adjust how we did content. And then BERT was a significant change in how it was organizing information. It's what they call entity-based. And an entity, in simple terms, is just a fact. And Google was getting better at locating and connecting very specific snippets of facts on your website to the query. So this progression over time is keywords to conversation. When computers and software didn't have as much power and capability, it was metadata. It was a simple five-part metadata algorithm that figured out where the likely sites were, but it was easy to game. Conversations is not easy to game, so the recommendations have become more simple in a way to create great relevant content that is conversational, and that gets you ready for that gets you ready to provide your content to your users and gets you ready for voice search interaction. So next, we're going to talk about schemas. And schemas are a way to add a lot more information to your website without exposing it on your website to your customers. It's really data that is for the crawlers to pick up and use that information to add you to their knowledge graph. And so if you've ever worked in HTML metadata, it's like that, but a lot more comprehensive. I'm going to show you in what way. But before I do that, since 2011, since this concept of microdata and schema has been around, in my community, we've been asking each other, does this really do anything? Does it correlate? I get that Google's advocating for it, but does it correlate to rank impressions and traffic? And part of my relationship with Milestone and Anil is that they had the data to prove this, because they've done more than 9,400 schema deployments, which is more than any other that I've heard of. And their average improvement from doing a robust schema deployment is 20, 30, 40% gain in traffic from the schema, from what it does in exposing the visibility of the content and bringing people to the website. So the average deployment on a website for Milestone has uses 40 different schema types with an average of 130 attributes and properties. So there are 818 total schema types as of this week, and there was a new one announced for COVID-19 that's good for healthcare and government to highlight to Google that there are COVID-related announcements to share. And one of the things that's interesting is as these schemas have expanded, you can see that for general websites that there's even more and even better information available, or schemas available to use, FAQs, question and answer, search results, how to, images, videos, and breadcrumbs. And these are all things that all of us can use to help Google understand and contextualize our website. And we think and we see that this is the highest impact of any on-page or off-page technique that we're doing for our hundreds of customers and thousands of websites, with an average increase, as I said, of 24%. But there are challenges to Schema. There are definitely challenges. The architecture is a lot more complicated than standard metadata from 20 years ago. The code is a lot more complex. There's more lines of code for each section, and our average Schema adaptation on a web page is 750 lines of code. In addition, schema.org and Google make changes to the architecture, make changes to the schema guidelines and directions. They deprecate things, they take things away, they add things back, and that can cause errors. So on the deployment side, there's often a significant cooperation needed from your IT department, and then on an ongoing basis, keeping it up to date and keeping it healthy, which is often the bigger challenge, is also one of the three challenges. Mm-hmm. So the schema markup that we do is nested. This is what we mean by the architecture being complicated, that you have to understand what schema types apply to your website, and then you have to drill down into the attributes to add in product information and then attributes to the product information. And this is how you can identify all the facts and help Google take thousands of facts from a set of pages on your website and put them in the right context in the knowledge graph and be visible and attractive and relevant and most helpful to the people who are looking for things. So this is the data I was always looking for. Like, I was looking for how much lift is there, how fast is the lift, and this is a very large international restaurant chain that deployed Schema on October 17th and saw very dramatic boosts. And we see this across dozens of accounts. We see this across almost everywhere we do the deployment. 20, 30, 40. In this particular case, we saw 33 to 66% increase in impressions, which is, on a big site like this, that's 3 to 6 million impressions a day. And a lot of those impressions, a good chunk of them, were on unbranded keywords, which is part of the true winning opportunity within SEO. That adds up to 250,000 visits per day and tens of millions of dollars of incremental revenue per year. So this was a huge success for this big company, and they're going to take this project and go international with it next. So the next case study I want to look at is a B2B enterprise. And a lot of the people in the you might have been in the SEJ audience when we presented this with VMware about 6 months ago. But they were looking to build a foundation for entity-based search and voice search, and with the traditional goal of increasing rank and traffic. And what they came to us to do was a robust schema, but they had that limitation, one of those challenges that I mentioned before, of not having a lot of internal IT resources to either deploy it or keep an eye on it. But the results were fantastic. They saw, again, a 24% increase in impressions, 30% increase in visitors, huge, what we call saturate the SERPs. Their quick answers, the rich snippets at the top went up 170%. People also ask up 115, and equivalent marketing value on just a small portion of the site. It was kind of like an early pilot with just a chunk of the pages, with a marketing value of over $300,000. So another big success, and they're looking to expand this one too. Now, this is what I was mentioning. This is the other limitation, the other challenge here are the errors. So for this hardware retail chain, you can see we deployed in early mid-January, and we saw that gain in impressions and clicks, just like we like to see. And then in June, there was a change in the schema definitions, and we saw a dramatic drop in just a couple of days, 35% drop in traffic on that first product schema change, and we caught it, we fixed it, and it went back up. So this speaks not just to the correlation of schema and traffic. This speaks to the causation. When it's good, it goes up. When it's bad, it goes down. When you fix it, it goes back up. A couple months later, another change affected, and we saw a similar drop, not quite as steep, but this is the other third challenge, is the ongoing maintenance and keeping an eye on it. All right, so let's take a break and do an online survey. Brent?
Beautiful. We have 2 polls actually that I'm going to throw up. And again, just ask everyone to please participate if you don't mind. First question, have you implemented Schema on your website? Yes, no, or I'm not quite sure. Again, we're talking about Schema, and the question is, have you implemented on your website? Select one of the following: yes, no, or unsure. I'm going to give it just a couple seconds to let people kind of get their votes in, and then I will share the results. All right, I've got about 70% of the people voting, so I'm going to go ahead and close it out. We have pretty solid numbers. They're not changing much as far as percentage-wise goes. So let me share the results. 59%, almost 60%, 2/3, yeah, close, have implemented it. And that's actually kind of impressive to me, to be honest. It's something I didn't think as many people. I thought more, probably like 40% of people had implemented. So that's actually kind of a nice stat to see. I'm going to go ahead and hide that, and I'm going to go ahead and open up our next poll real quick. And this is kind of a continuation question. Did you, for those 60-ish% who did Schema, did you use more than 5 Schema types? Yes, no, or unsure? Again, I'll give this a couple minutes to allow you all the opportunity to vote. I know that some of you won't be able to vote because you voted that you had not put Schema on your site at all, so that kind of makes this a moot point for you. That said, I'm going to go ahead and close this out and share the results. 24% did more than 5 Schema types, and the rest were no. And I think that is an important one, Eric, for sure, because of the fact that we know now how many elements of Schema truly need to be on a page. And it's definitely more than 5. So that's good to see, and hopefully people are going to learn a lot here and be able to implement a lot more Schema going forward. So I'll pass it back to you guys. You guys can go ahead and carry on.
All right, Anil, take us away.
Good morning, this is Anil, and we're going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about local, right? And what you can do on your GMB profiles. So any business, right? Whether you are a location-based business and you actually have local profiles, or whether you're a corporate, enterprise or corporate entity and you have GMB profiles, there's a huge opportunity to make sure that you're actually updating your GMB profiles and taking control of that. And in the current environments, it's even more important. It's as important as your website, because a lot of people are actually just getting the information from the knowledge graph, from the GMB profile that shows up. And I'll give you 3 examples here. One of brands in different, or 3 examples of different verticals, people and brands in different verticals, and how they're making best use of local listings. So you can see the first example that I'm showing here is a restaurant, but absolutely fantastic use of using their profile to communicate with their guests. They added curbside takeout to their name, which is very critical right now because that's what people are looking for. And then you can see that they checked off dine-in and delivery, and they marked they're available for takeout. So that's a classic example of making sure that you're proactively actually going into your GMB profiles, into your local profiles, whether it's on Bing or Google or other places, and you're updating the information relative to that. The second example that I'll show you is, let me see, is of Apple. And in this case, what you can see, what you find is Apple is marking their stores temporarily closed, which is great because they don't want consumers going into their stores and getting frustrated. So they're taking control of the information in their knowledge panel. and communicating to the guests, and it just points to customer service. The third example is completely different. It's a Ford Motor Company, and what you see here is it's not about the locations or the stores, but they're actually giving their customers and their guests numbers to call so that they can actually talk to people and they can solve people's problems, whether it's on the customer service chat or it's on the phone numbers. So these are three classic examples of where the brands have taken control of the information that they want their customers to see. If you don't do that, what's going to happen is Google is going to crowdsource all of this information, and you don't want that, right? You want to manage your own information, and this particular piece is almost as important as what you do on your website. And for me to rest of this presentation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you talk through some examples. That's the best way for me to illustrate what's the importance of some of these different things that I'm talking about. So let me give you an example of a couple of brands and how they're handling this. So this is an example of a national bank with thousands of branches. And as the shelter-in-place orders were being rolled out by different cities over the last 2-3 weeks, what they were finding was that the branch hours, the availability, whether the branch was open or not, was sort of changing by the hour, by the minute actually sometimes, right? Because there was a lot of uncertainty into whether the people were available in the branches to cover the under the new realm, whether the branch was open, the hours were changing. So they needed to communicate with their customers and members very frequently. So we did two things. So one is obviously we started changing the hours and the information on the local profiles for the branches, sometimes twice a day, but definitely once a day. And that allowed them to send up-to-date information to their customers about their availability and about when they were open. The second thing that they wanted to do was actually talk to their customers in the moment of this crisis. Everybody's panicky, everybody's worried. And we started posting on Google Posts and thousands of posts to communicate with their guests. And the primary purpose why this brand actually did this was to communicate with their guests and make sure that the most precise, up-to-date information was available. They were not expecting any search gain, or they were not expecting any positive, other than better customer service. They were not expecting anything from search point of view. But if you look at the bottom part of this page, the impact of this was fantastic. Their views on Google My Business profiles went up actually 10x. The actions, the number of phone calls and different things, that went up 31%. The calls went up 63%. So this is a classic example of where if you do right, what you're going to see is automatically the customers or the market is going to reward you for doing things right. And in this case, the right thing was to communicate with the guest, make sure there's empathy in the messaging, and make sure that they're communicating the guest hours. And in return of that, the customers rewarded them with better search visibility. The second example that I'm going to talk about is a little bit before the crisis hit. Let me see. And this is an example of a retail chain. And you can see that once we started, so over several hundred stores, and when we started putting the information out through our platform starting September, the number of phone calls to the stores, which was a very big indicator of the amount of business that they had in the stores or online, just went up dramatically, right? It went up from, it jumped up about 30 points, 30% points. That's very, very difficult to achieve. That's thousands and thousands of additional customers that they gained. Now, one of the questions that I get asked is, why would you see the change? Because, you're pushing the data into the same, no matter which platform you use, you're pushing the data into the channel, which is exactly right? The platform is just the conduit or the pipe to get the data into Google or Apple or Bing. But what really matters is the quality of data, quality of information. How many attributes are you filling out? What data are you presenting about your brand into those channels. And the deeper that you go into the data, the quality of information, the quality of attributes that you're filling out, what you're going to find is that the search engines will reward you, because that leads to a better user experience. So this is not about gaming the system. This is about being good to your customers, making sure that you're actually presenting the best of information to the customers for a better user experience. And if you do that, you're going to see the gains automatically come through. So two great examples. I'm gonna our team just earlier in the week posted a fantastic blog post. If you're intrigued by some of what I just showed you and what are the kinds of things that we're doing during this time frame, check out our blog.milestoneinternet.com, and download that article. It's a fantastic article. Will give you it's a great resource for you to know what to do during these times. Okay. Well, let's switch to the next topic, mobile. I'm sure mobile is top of mind for majority of you on the phone. I know it's top of mind for us because we're seeing majority of the traffic and discovery happening on the mobile phone. In some verticals, even if the conversion actually happens on the desktop, what we're finding is that discovery actually happens on the mobile phone, right? So consumers are making decisions about the brands, or whether it's B2B or B2C, it doesn't matter. The customers are making decisions about whether they want to use the brand or not based on what they experience on mobile. So AMP stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages. It's just a super fast version of your mobile site that sits in Google's cache, which leads to very fast download times. So essentially, it's a really, really fast version of your mobile site. We've done over 4,300 AMP deployments, so that's probably more than anybody else in the world. So we have a lot of data that I can share with you. Part of Milestone research team that has come up with some of this data. So we'll share some of this here. So I'm going to show you a great example for those of you who've not experienced AMP or just watch the right part of the screen where you have the two mobile phones. The left side is where I'm going to bring up an AMP site, and the right side is where I'm going to bring up a regular mobile site. And if you actually watch the difference between how quickly the site downloads, it'll give you an idea why AMP is so fantastic. So watch this. I'm going to say click when I click on this. Okay, I'm gonna click now. Watch the left side more carefully because it disappears very rapidly. Okay, click. So you can see the left side changed, and the right side is gonna take about 7 or 8 seconds and 9 seconds for it to fully load. So hopefully you caught on to that demo. The AMP site download time was less than a second, about 8 or 9 seconds on the right side. That's really what AMP does. So if you're struggling with site speed on your mobile site, this is a fantastic way to get around it. And what we've typically seen, based on a dozen sites that we launched very early, we saw mobile visits, and we've been doing AMP for about 3 years or close to 4 years, and we saw mobile visits go up about 60%. 59, the visits went, the overall traffic increased, the mobile impressions increased, of course, the engagement and the speed increased. But let's look at a more recent example. This is just in the last 6 months or 4 or 5 months. And what you can see is the implementation of mobile across a furniture chain for multiple stores led to a 100% increase in mobile impressions. So your search visibility doubled deploying AMP, and a 30% increase in mobile traffic. Again, it goes back to the reason the brand is experiencing this is mobile site is a much better. AMP site is a much better user experience because it's so much faster, and what the search engines are doing is rewarding a better user experience by increasing the search visibility. So so if you're in the audience, you're wondering, so you're sitting on a mobile site that does not have a great speed, this is a great way to get around it. What I can tell you is that you're going to see pretty significant gain in mobile traffic and mobile market share, right? The last thing that I want to talk about is FAQs and voice. And often when I get to this section, the first question people ask is, how big is voice? And is it truly that 50% of voice search will 50% of all search will be voice driven by 2021? There is a metric out there, and for me, that's not as important as what's the percentage and what's going on with voice. What's very important is to really understand where search is headed. So where search is headed is it's moving into conversations. I think Erik started this presentation with that. All the search engines, what they're focused on is delivering the precise answer. And so the search is moving from typing in keywords to actually typing in the full question, or speaking the full question, right? And what search engines are trying to do is give a very precise answer to that question, whether it's on desktop or mobile, or it's on one of the mobile assistant or the digital assistant devices. So really, voice search is not about just voice. It's about where the search is headed and making sure that you optimize your SEO for the next generation. So I'll show you two examples of brands who are doing this very effectively. You can see US Bank, they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of FAQs populated on their website, and basically a lot of those questions are getting picked up on the search engines and getting the answers. And you can see on the right side, McDonald's doing the same thing. And the reason there's really three elements to making sure that voice and your FAQs get picked up. And the three elements are making sure that number one thing is you have to have the content on your website. So you have to create an FAQ content on your website that talks about the questions that the public is asking about you. The second component is you need to make sure that technically your site is very sound. And the two components that I would focus on is the mobile site speed and the schemas, because schemas help Google and Bing and other search engines understand what text, what content you have on your site. So making sure that you have the right schemas and making sure your site speed, you're mobile friendly and you have the right site speed. If you do those two things, and the third thing I think in terms of voice search is you want to create actions and skills on Google, Alexa and Google Home Assistant. But if you do those things, you're gonna get rewarded very heavily. Look at this case. So this is an example of a brand that had FAQs on their site, but they were not getting indexed because they didn't have the right schemas. So 2 weeks after deploying the schemas on the FAQ pages, you can just see not even 2 weeks, it's almost a week later, right? From the schemas were deployed between Feb 22 and 29. There were FAQs on the page that were added or that were already existing. You can just see and this is a brand with thousands of locations. You can see a very significant increase in the FAQs that they're getting picked up on. So this is a classic example of making sure that your site is technically sound, you have the right content for the consumers for your FAQ, and if you do those things, you're going to see a very, very significant pickup. At this point, I'm going to hand it off back to Erik, and he's going to carry us home from here.
Thanks, Anil. So as I promised, I'm going to mention a couple of pitfalls to avoid, and that is missing signals from your customers. That's just being tone deaf. That's a huge mistake. Lack of schema or schema errors on your site is another thing you want to avoid. And failing to saturate the SERP and create different asset types and drive them through these sub-channels within organic is a missed opportunity. And if your mobile speed score is below 65, you need to work on it. Now, takeaways and things to do in the crisis and recovery phase: create and test new offers. Update local, keep it up to date, start using Google Posts. Launch or update FAQs, deploy, fix, and update schemas, and use AMP on key pages. So these are five takeaways, and hopefully those are opportunities for your business as well. So this is the first time we just finished this research. So we thought it would be interesting to take the total list of registrants, and this is the most registered for SEJ webinar of the year so far, and we had more than 2,000 registrants. We took a random sample of those registrants, and we looked at their schema, and 45% of the sites in that sample had no schema. And only 4% of those that had schema had more than 8 schema types out of the 818 available. 11% of those sites are showing schema errors. And we looked at the index pages, and we see that there's 2.4 times as many pages indexed for sites that have schema versus those that don't. And kind of surprisingly, the average mobile speed score of this sample base, was 27.6. So this is going to be hindering your organic results. So this is definitely something you should look at and consider AMP and other ways to accelerate. Maybe changing your CMS. I know I was on a CMS, a freeware CMS, and it was incredibly slow. And I just went to a different one and picked up about 40 points on Google Speed Test. So in order to help you with this process, we are offering free site assessments to the attendees on this call. And the first 30 attendees that register at go.milestoneinternet.com/audit, we will prepare a dashboard and some specific recommendations on how to deploy or improve schema, mobile speed, and a local and GMB. And we think that we've been doing this for about the last 6 months, and people have found it really helpful. So if we can do this for you, please sign up, and we'll turn it around in about a week. All right, Brent, that brings us to question and answers. What kind of questions did we get?
Beautiful. We got quite a few questions. Just a quick comment, as I think you mentioned, these are really 3 of the main areas, like speed, schema, whether or not you've got your local stuff set. I mean, that's essentially what we're looking at for digital marketing today. And this is some of the most relevant information out there right now, as far as like what you can do. So I definitely suggest people take advantage of that. I had said this before to you, even if they just get the information, it's great information, and it's from some people that are really leading in the space. So highly recommend you take advantage of that if you're down for it. Quite a few questions. I'm going to go through them in the way we got them, just to give people the opportunity to have their questions answered. And I'm going to have these questions sent. We have over like 30 questions, so there's no way we're going to get through them all. So I'll send these over to you guys. I'll have Christy send them over after the presentation. We'll get answers. We'll put them in the recap post, so that we can definitely get those questions answered. So definitely anybody who didn't get their question answered, check the recap post, and we'll have that. First off, kind of a meta keywords question. There's a lot of indication out there that meta keywords is a signal of spam for Google. Papa John's has them. Is this something that they're providing? I guess a couple parts to this question, because it evolves. Is that accurate? In your opinion, are meta keywords a spam signal? And is it something that Papa John's might be doing for other search engines? What are the thoughts on keeping meta keywords around?
So I'll take this one, Anil. So Google has said that this is a null signal. They don't care about it. They don't care about most of the traditional metadata because they are reading the page. I thought it was interesting that they did the keywords tag, but they didn't do the meta description. I think there is an argument, if you're an international site, if you have international business, that you could put in keywords for Baidu, for example. Last I checked, that they were still it had some weight there. So it's a very weak signal. I wouldn't pay attention to it. I'm sorry. I pointed it out to you.
Second question, with contactless, we gave those 2 examples of Papa John's and Best Buy doing the contactless. Is this something that customers have deemed as a keyword, or is this something that those brands are trying to create a keyword out of? Is this something that everybody listening should be taking into account, or is this just those 2 companies creating their own word?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they were meeting market demand. They realized that that transmission of the virus was going to be an issue, and they came up and they were really early to market with a contactless and the no touch. So I think they were out first with it, and I think they used the multiple omni-channel approach to create demand for the service that they had defined. But I'm also hearing lots and lots more curbside, where you pop your trunk and they're going to slide in whatever it is, your groceries or whatever. And I think people are looking for that now, particularly in cities that are near their peak in coronavirus. People are really looking not to get exposed. So I think it's a chicken and an egg, and I think they made it's the chicken first. The chicken decided that they would offer this and create demand for it.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to look at a lot of other phrases like inbound marketing and a lot of these things where it's coined and then it becomes a core fundamental concept. And I think it's important, you noted this earlier, we are looking at positive signs of a quick turnaround, but I think most people have, especially kind of in the leadership space, have really looked at this being not going back to normal, but creating a new normal, as the New York governor said this morning. We're looking at improving and recreating the normal. And so a lot of these type of contactless type services may very well continue to be the normal going forward. So I would definitely be paying attention to those kind of shifts and looking at what is the new norm and how can you participate in that and help establish that as a brand.
Right, that's the crisis recovery growth model. Like, do some things in crisis and recovery that make you a better company, that make you more empathetic to your customers and keep you on top, and they'll reward you for that if you do the right things for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. There's FAQ schema and there's Q&A schema, and the question is, should I choose one or the other, or can I have both on my site?
Anil, do you want me to take it?
Yeah, go ahead, Erik.
Okay, so those are two totally different schemas. Those are two I looked at very closely. So question and answer is for a forum where there are people, where it's more like user-generated content. FAQs are for questions that are answered by the site itself. So on the same page, you probably wouldn't have both schemas on the same page, but you could have them on the same domain.
Great answer. Great description there. I didn't even know that, so that's good to know. It's about whether you're answering those questions or somebody else is answering those questions.
Yep.
Do you have any experience with Adobe Experience Manager and how Schema works with it?
Anil?
Yeah. So a lot of the examples that Erik actually showed, they were based on Adobe Experience Manager. So, the best way, the simplest way to deploy Schema on Adobe Experience Manager is through the tag manager, how we're doing through basically remotely from our platform. But it deploys pretty seamlessly. And the case studies that Erik showed, I don't know if he shared 3, 2 of those were Adobe Experience Manager, and the other one was Salesforce CMS platform. So
very cool. So it works pretty smooth. Use Tag Manager, and it's pretty smooth implementation.
Yes.
On the restaurant chain schema implementation example that you had, how were you able to measure the indexing boost? Do you have some tools that you were using or some metrics that you were specifically looking at to kind of evaluate that?
Yeah.
Anil?
Erik, you want to take that, or should
You go.
Yeah. So the kind of the metrics that we're looking at is basically your basic metrics of how many. We're looking at all the typical SEO metrics. So we're looking at search visibility. We are looking at impressions. We're looking at organic search traffic. We're looking at keyword certain pages on what impact the keyword rankings had on those specific pages. And a lot of this data is coming from the Search Console. So it's real data. And the other, and then, I showed a chart earlier in our deck where we were looking at people also ask the different categories of organic KPIs that Google is looking at. Images, we see a big increase in images once you mark it up with schemas. So it's essentially all SEO metrics that we're looking at, and but we're measuring it on the pages where where the change is happening. Another thing that we found is, which is really fantastic, which we even didn't know, but we recently, like Erik said, we've started, we're looking at a lot of research data, that even on the GMB profiles, you will find an increase in traffic and increase in search visibility and increase in the number of phone calls and activity when you deploy Schema. So those are all the KPIs that we were measuring in terms of measuring the engagement. So we saw an increase on the site in search impressions, the different metrics to measure SEO, and then we also saw the GMB profile data go up. So it's a combination of those two.
Beautiful. I'm going to jump ahead. We have a couple more Schema questions, but I want to make sure we touch on the 3 different topics. So I'm going to jump ahead and get you those questions later. When looking at the posts for the bank case study, you were talking about updating the hours of operation. In some cases, more than once daily, they were doing this. The question is just to clarify, is that because the data was changing that quickly, or is there some kind of tactic there that people should, pull insight from?
There was no tactic. This is pure data was changing. So, my advice, and we've done very, very well with all the projects because we play clean. There is no gamesmanship. You just do what's right for the customer, and you're going to win. And in that case, the data was changing more than twice a day. So we settled on twice a day frequency. And when things started calming down, then we came to once a day. And now we're at once a week. But essentially, it is because the data was changing.
Beautiful. And in GMB right now, which is short for Google, small business, just so in case anybody didn't know, in Google My Business GMB, are the updates going instantly now? Is that something that's when you make those changes, it's going live instantly, or is there a delay?
It depends on the KPIs. Not all the KPIs are getting updated. So for example, your review section and the answer section is not getting updated, but certain other KPIs are getting updated. And it also depends on the type of business you are in. If you're an essential services business, I think Google is giving priority to those businesses versus if you're not in that business. But we've seen, even non-essential, the changes do happen, but not right away. Sometimes it's taking a little longer. But so I won't let any brand keep that from making the changes, and just Google will get to it, and we're seeing the changes happen. I think it's just a matter of when they get to it.
Beautiful. So jumping over a little bit into AMP. If you're adding content to your business site on a regular basis, do you need to have both regular and AMP sites or versions of the sites or sections of the sites, or does AMP pages update instantly?
Well, that's a fantastic question, Brent, because AMP will only be effective if the content on your AMP site is canonical to the content on your mobile site. So you have to make sure that the content updates on both sides. And so you do have to deploy some technology to make sure that the content, as you're updating your mobile site content, your AMP site is updating almost immediately. If the content are not identical, the AMP is not going to be effective. So you do have to make sure that the content syncs.
Yeah, and even if you're not syncing almost like real time, you'll start to get alerts from Google that are like, hey, we have an AMP issue, and they'll kind of show up and then they'll go away, but it still sometimes can trigger that even just after a short period of time. So definitely important.
Yeah, what we're doing is we're doing some crawlers. We've deployed some technology to make sure that we're constantly testing the two sites for differentials and updating the AMP site as soon as new content gets added. We're actually doing this in deep discussions with a brand. We're in the process of deploying where we're going to change the content by the hour because it's a new site.
Yeah. One more question. AMP is impactful in helping speed up sites. The example we had in the presentation shows that, and I think it's pretty universally accepted. But the question here is, how impactful is it really in speeding up a site that, say, will it increase a site that's at like 3 or 4 seconds to less than a second, or is it more like a 10 to 5 second? How far can AMP truly improve you?
What I can't comment to is, I don't think we've drawn a correlation between your previous speed to the new speed. What I can say with confidence is 100% of AMP implementations are less than 1 second. So in terms of speeding up the content, I think it speeds up dramatically. But as far as whether if my site speed was 7 seconds versus 3 seconds, what's the, whether I'm gonna proportionately see a difference. I don't have data. I'm sure our team has that data, but I don't have that. But what I do know is that pretty much every single implementation, it goes to less than a second download.
Beautiful. As I mentioned, really effective, tips, really great content, and really timely. This is something I think a lot of people are worried about, and a lot of people who didn't know they were going to be worried about this are all of a sudden been thrown into the worry of this whole, we've got to hurry up and get things moving quick. And so I really appreciate both of you coming on, talking about these tips. I really think it's awesome that you're offering, kind of 50 people to get that free audit, and I think it's a really great opportunity for people to kind of catch up and get on board. And again, remember, everyone out there listening, this is where you needed to go anyway. Honestly, sometimes tragedies just force us to kind of look at things differently and realize that we need to move ahead quicker anyway. But this is where we were all going, and this is what everybody's been touting, and this is where Google and digital marketing has been going for the last couple of years anyway. So take advantage of it. Push yourself forward, get yourself on track. If you're an SEO out there, take the opportunity to get your CEOs and your executive team on board with this. Definitely use this opportunity to kind of jump ahead and be ready for that recovery. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.